If you're trying to stay under 524 but want to add more cards to your wallet, don't forget about all the great points-earning debit cards out there. Flues is introducing a new debit card that lets you earn 2% back, and you can fund the debit card with Google Pay, Apple Pay, PayPal, ACH, and more. You can use this debit card anywhere that Visa is accepted. Early access will be granted to those who have been active on the Flues app. Download the Flues app using the link in the show notes and get excited for this new debit card. Thank you to Flues for partnering with this episode of the Geobreeze Travel Podcast. Welcome to the Geobreeze Travel Podcast, a show for anyone wanting to level up their travel hacking lifestyle. I'm your host, Julia Menez. I'm a travel hacker, coach, speaker, Filipino-American ENTJ who loves solid travel gear and using shortcuts on spreadsheets. On this show, I'm on a mission to bring you travel hackers from all walks of life to help you level up your travel hacking game. We dive into credit cards, miles, points, strategy, mindset, and the secrets behind how to travel the world for next to no cost. So let's get hacking.
So back to the networking. The more friends you have who are in this space, the more you'll find out about these types of deals. This specific deal I found out with a friend who's just really great at points and miles stuff and really fun to travel with. But other than that, I like the flight deal and fair deal alert for deals leaving from the US. I like Scott's Cheap Flights. It's there is a free version, but I pay for the premium version because I want those business class deals. And then I also like Secret Flying for deals from outside of the US. Since I'm not always based in the US, it's nice to find out what other deals are going on in different parts of the world.
Hey there, points people. You just heard a clip from Caroline Lupini. Caroline has been a digital nomad since 2014, and points and miles have been a big part of her travel strategy. She has been to 88 countries and counting and hopes to visit them all someday. She's had her work featured in Business Insider, Flyer Talk, 10x Travel, Upgraded Points, Milion Mile Secrets, and many other reputable channels. In this episode, Caroline and I discuss how she balances her digital nomad lifestyle and also some next-level resources she uses to rig her award-booking itineraries, find availability, and more. If you love hearing, there's an app for that. Whenever you have a points and miles question, you will love my free weekly newsletter. Each week, I send out an app of the week recommendation for how to stay organized or earn more points and miles without opening a new credit card. Each newsletter also includes a secret link to a free coaching call with me, first come, first serve. Sign up for the newsletter using the links in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Hey, Caroline, welcome to the Geobreeze Travel Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited to be talking to you here today. You are in Greece, which is awesome. And before we get into how you booked that trip and how you've booked so many other trips, because you've been to, how many countries have you been to?
88.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. But before we talk about all of that, tell us how you got started with points and miles, even just getting started with traveling a lot. What's your background? How did you get into all this?
As a kid, I always liked to travel. We went on vacations like to Florida to visit my grandparents. And my parents were big fans of cruises because they loved being able to unpack one time and see a bunch of different places, especially with young kids. So I always loved to travel, but because my family always took these 1 week vacations, they had the 1 or 2 weeks off work a year. We always went on pretty nice vacations. So I didn't know that travel could be affordable. I assumed that I'd, slave away at my job and then take that 1 week of vacation every year. But when I was in college, it was about a 4-week trip to Europe. It was a bus tour because my parents wouldn't let me travel alone. But in those 4 weeks, we cruised all over Europe. I think we went to something like 12 or 13 countries, which is obviously traveling pretty fast. But I loved that trip too. And that kind of took travel to a slightly more affordable level. It was still not a cheap trip. It wasn't budget travel by any stretch, but it made me think like, oh, I could go on a long trip someday. And I think after that, as I was researching for the next trip I planned with a friend from that Europe trip, we wanted to go to Costa Rica and he lived in Oregon. I lived in Michigan. So we were like, how do we both get there for a reasonable price? And I'm pretty sure I just stumbled on a points and miles blog. I don't know which one. I don't know exactly how it happened. All I remember is like one day I didn't know points and miles existed. And then the next day I was spending probably like 2 to 4 hours a day reading about points and miles because I immediately knew that there was value.
Nice. So once you discovered this, were you one of those people who dove in and opened 5 cards at one time, or what was your credit card application process?
I started off a little more slowly because I was still in college, so I didn't have much of an income. I didn't have a long credit history. I had already gotten a few credit cards as a freshman and sophomore in college because when I knew I wanted to start building credit. So I got my first credit card when I was 18, and it was the Discover It card. And after that, there were occasionally bonuses for credit cards, just like no annual fee cashback cards for, $100 or $150. And again, as a college student without much of an income, I was like, oh, $100, that buys me a lot of food. So I started applying for cards, maybe just 1 or 2 a year before I even knew about points and miles. But once I knew about points and miles, I still focused more on no annual fee cards because I was a student. I know I got the Chase Sapphire Preferred pretty early on, but then it wasn't really until after I graduated that things ramped up pretty significantly.
Once you had your first round of cards, what was your first redemption where you were like, oh my God, it works. I can travel for free?
I don't remember exactly what my first redemption that I actually flew for sure was, but I booked a trip that ended up getting canceled. It was with a guy. We broke up. So that trip didn't happen. With the same guy, I had booked another trip, but we broke up. So that trip didn't happen, but it was supposed to be my first trip to Asia. We were supposed to go to Thailand for just 10 days. But when we broke up, I had also quit my job because I was planning to move to where he lived. And since we broke up, I wasn't going to move there anymore and also didn't have a job anymore. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll go to Asia for 6 weeks instead of 10 days because I don't have anything to come back to right now. And since he wasn't coming, I flew there in economy, but I flew home in first class. And so that was definitely the first big redemption that I made with my miles. It was the first time I ever flew a premium cabin internationally, and it was Thai and Lufthansa. So I started out pretty big with my first class redemption.
That is a nice redemption and sounds like a pretty good way to get over a breakup too, where you're like,
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm in first class, living my best single lady life. It's all good.
Yeah, it
So
was great.
this was before you had started working, right? How were you affording this?
So this was after I graduated from college. I studied engineering originally. I worked as an engineer for 10 months after I graduated from college. And this was after that. Like I was working in Michigan and I had been planning to move to Baltimore. So I quit my engineering job in Michigan with the intention of finding a new engineering job in Baltimore. So I'd saved up some money in those 10 months, but not a ton. But then luckily, once you get to Asia, it's pretty cheap. I was in Cambodia and Vietnam for those 6 weeks. So I think my average expenses were probably $20 to $25 a day while I was there.
Nice. Yeah, that emergency fund comes in handy if you just have a lot of money saved up. So at one point, did you transition from engineering to writing?
It was actually around that time, and because of that breakup, as I mentioned, I was planning to go and get a new engineering job. I was also planning to work on getting my master's in business because I knew that at some point I probably didn't want to be spending all my time in the lab. I wanted to be maybe working on the business side for an engineering firm or something like that. But since I didn't want to move to Baltimore anymore, I had applied to one school that wasn't in Baltimore. It was Indiana University, and they had an online program. And that's why I applied, because I knew I could do that program from Baltimore, and it's a really good business school. So since I didn't want to move to Baltimore, that's the business school I decided to go to. And I was already blogging a bit for fun on the side then. I had a blog called Point Princess, and it was hosted on First Board, which I think they still might exist barely. I'm not really sure. But they had a conference in Seattle, and I went and just met a bunch of people there. And I met Ari Charlstein, who owns Award Magic, which is an award booking service. And he was looking for more people to help actually complete the award bookings for his clients. And I had a lot of free time on my hands and needed a way to make some money. So I started working for him. And that was my first freelance gig that I got. And then that led to like more connections with people in the space. And my first freelance writing gig, I started for Frugal Travel Guy probably about 6 months after that.
Nice. What advice would you have for somebody in today's world? Does it work exactly the same where you should just network and meet people to get freelancing gigs? If somebody's like, oh, I want to travel the world and be completely remote and I have some money saved up, I'd like to try freelance writing for points. What would your advice be for them?
Yeah, I definitely think networking is so important and across like any field, not just freelance writing or, anything. And I think it's amazing to me how little networking was talked about when I was in school because that's how I've found almost all of my jobs now, even my first engineering jobs were all found through networking, and then all of the freelance writing I've done has been through networking, and you just never know what people you meet, the connections you're able to make, and how you might be able to help them in the future, or how they might be able to help you. And even somebody you met years ago could later become such an important part of your network. So yeah, I think that's definitely still the number one way to make things happen.
Awesome. So, talk a little bit about your progression from freelance writing to now you are full time at Forbes. Talk a little bit about your career progression through that.
So I started freelance writing. That would have been in toward the end of 2014, I think. And just as I as I wrote more, my name got out there more. And as you know, there aren't a ton of women in the points and miles community, and it's only gotten better over time. So back in 2013, it was way fewer women than currently, I think. So I think just being a woman writing about points and miles gave me a leg up as different websites were looking to add more diversity to their voice. So I just pretty much started getting emails from people who ran other websites or recruiters who were helping other websites find new writers saying, hey, do you have time for more work? And usually the answer to that question was yes. So over between the end of 2014 and like mid 2019, I just slowly worked on building up my freelance writing business and dabbled in other things here and there. I did some photography work for a while and I started a YouTube channel, but definitely for me, the freelance writing is what kicked off the best for me.
So, how do you find the best deals? What's your strategy for picking where you're going to travel next since you are very often constantly on the road traveling to new countries?
I kind of have a mixed strategy, I guess. There are definitely places that I want to go, and I've used my miles to go to those places. But I really look a lot for just whatever airfare deals exist. And early on, that started out as just, where can I go the cheapest? And so there are often, sub $400 flights to Europe. My first big trip I did that wasn't a miles redemption after I graduated from college was to Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE because my friend and I found a $600 round trip. And we were like, well, haven't met anybody who's been to most of those countries before. Maybe we can find something interesting there. So we just booked it. It was on United. It was an economy. It wasn't super comfortable, but it was a really memorable trip because it was my first exposure to some really different places. Before that, I had only been to, like Vietnam and Europe and the Caribbean. So it was very different from anywhere I'd been before. Now I still look for deals a lot, but I definitely am a lot more into those premium economy and business class deals. So like in a couple weeks, I'm going to Sudan. And the reason why I'm going there is because earlier this year, there was a currency conversion error. So all flights leaving Sudan were pricing really, really low. And my friend and I were able to book a flight from Sudan to Egypt to Tokyo to LA. And then my friend's flight ends there. And then I go from there to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And it was $700 in business class. Unfortunately, the flight from Cairo to Tokyo is canceled because of COVID for the whole month. So that whole ticket ended up being canceled. So I'm not flying it, but we are still going to Sudan. But that's the reason why we decided to go there was because of this great business class deal. And it wasn't just business class. Economy was also pricing insanely low for that specific deal.
So, are you exploring Sudan or just going through the airport?
We're exploring. Yeah, some of our friends had thought about just going to like go pick up this ticket, but we were like, well, if we're going there anyway, we should actually see some of the country. So we're doing a 13-day trip where we're exploring the country.
What are you planning to do in Sudan? I think it's one of those places where nobody really thinks about what is there to do in Sudan.
So we booked a tour with a company. It's just like a small group tour, just because logistically it's difficult to travel there, and especially with COVID, everything's just extra complicated right now. All I really know for sure is that there are some pyramids that we're going to see. I haven't looked too much at the itinerary because there are too many things that are happening before that. But I got a recommendation from a friend who's been before, and she was like, "This is the company to go with. They were great." And she's traveled a lot of places, so I trust her opinion. And we were like, okay, this is what we're doing. Let's go.
Nice. Going back a little bit, where do you like to go to find these mistake fares or cheap cash deals or when there's a currency conversion? What's your favorite newsletter or website to find these deals?
So back to the networking. The more friends you have who are in this space, the more you'll find out about these types of deals. This specific deal I found out with a friend who's just really great at points and miles stuff and really fun to travel with. But other than that, I like the flight deal and fare deal alert for deals leaving from the US. I like Scott's cheap flights. There is a free version, but I pay for the premium version because I want those business class deals. And then I also like Secret Flying for deals from outside of the US. Since I'm not always based in the US, it's nice to find out what other deals are going on in different parts of the world.
Since you're not based in the US, how are you earning points and opening more credit cards? I imagine that's very hard because you can't really just apply for a credit card from Sudan. They're going to assume that that's fraud.
I mostly haven't really had a problem. I have a VPN on my computer. It's a free VPN that I get from my university degree. So it's either a free VPN or a very expensive VPN, depending on how you look at it. But arguably the most important useful part of my degree at this point in my life, since I'm not working as an engineer. So yeah, go to the University of Michigan if you want a free VPN for the rest of your life. But before I left the States, I applied for a few new cards. Some of them arrived before I left, so I have those with me. Some of them are at my parents' house, so my parents send me the number and I can start working on min spend online. So yeah, then it will be easier to keep working on those minimum spend requirements because I'll actually have the card for purchases here. But I've applied for cards from abroad before, and I don't think I've ever really had any issues. So I probably wouldn't try to apply from Sudan. But like applying from Europe or like South America, I've never had issues before.
What are the cards that you've opened most recently?
The most recent 4 I've opened, I had a targeted offer for an Amex Business Platinum card for 150,000 membership rewards points. I got the Alaska Airlines personal card with the 2-tiered welcome bonus for like 67,000 miles or something is the full bonus, 42 plus 25, I think. And then I got the United business card with the 150,000 mile bonus and the United Quest card.
Nice. Any particular reason you were going after those? I know that for the Amex one, it's because the 150,000 points is a really high offer, but any particular reason that you were going for the other ones?
So for the Amex and the United Business with the 150K bonuses, they're just really awesome bonuses. So it seemed like a good time to go for those. The Alaska card, I like Alaska miles a lot. They're really good for premium cabin redemptions, especially to Asia. And my balance is a little bit low. So 67,000 for that Alaska card, that's a really good bonus for Alaska. A lot of times Alaska is only 25,000 miles. So being able to get 67 is great. And then the United Quest card, 100K is still a great bonus, but I actually think that card is a very compelling card. I use United Miles a lot because they're very easy to redeem. And I like the 2 5,000 mile rebates each year. And it comes with United Club passes, which I also have a club card. So that's not super valuable to me, but it's nice to be able to give them to my parents when they're traveling or friends when they're traveling. And yeah, I think that card, United really hit the nail on the head with the benefits and the price point.
Nice. You mentioned the Alaska card. And so I got a bonus on that one. It was 80,000 points, and everybody was like, oh my God, it's super high. And so I jumped on it. It was the shiny card syndrome. So I don't actually know what I'm going to do with those points. What are some of your favorite ways to use Alaska points?
I would say my number one favorite way to use Alaska miles is probably for Japan Airlines first class. I flew them home from Asia a few years ago in the pre-COVID times when we could still travel to Asia. And that was just one of my favorite redemptions ever. Like the food was good, and the lounge, they have like Otoro, the fatty tuna at the lounges. And yeah, it was just like very comfortable and a really overall solid redemption. I can't remember exactly how many points it or how many miles it cost.
Hey everybody, quick life update. I got a new job. I recently accepted a position as a senior actuarial consultant, and I am so excited to earn more points and miles the old-fashioned way with business travel. Also, though, this means I'm going to have to cut back on the number of one-on-one coaching calls that I have available each month. If you would like to grab one of the limited spots, check out the link in the show notes. Also, I give away one free one-on-one coaching call each week. The secret link to sign up is in my weekly newsletter, which goes out every Monday, and it's first come, first served to grab the call. Also, I'm going to start reserving 30 minutes of each month's masterclass for group coaching. Even if you're a beginner and shy to ask questions in front of everyone, all you need to do is type out your question and you will get a response from a room full of experts. You can find links to sign up for the newsletter, monthly masterclasses, and Patreon, which gets you access to the masterclasses and also recordings of all past events in the show notes. This week's Patreon shout out goes out to Ryan. Thank you so much for being a part of the Geobreeze Travel Patreon community.
Even business class is great on Japan Airlines. And then I haven't flown Cathay First. I've flown Cathay Business once, but those are supposed to both be great. And the price is really good to go to Asia. I was supposed to fly last year home from Australia via Fiji in Fiji Airways business class, which also is Fiji Airways in general is a really good redemption with Alaska miles, but that got canceled because of COVID. And Fiji Airways business class award space is really hard to find. So I don't know if I'll ever get lucky enough to find it again.
So you're still traveling quite a bit despite the pandemic, which has just put a complete damper on some people's travels. What are some of your best pieces of advice for somebody who's still looking to travel, but in a COVID world where plans just have to change on a dime all the time?
Yeah, I would just say be prepared for plans to change. I'm normally a planner. Like before COVID, I would have a pretty general sense of where I was going to be for the next like 10-ish months. Not with every detail booked. Like I wouldn't have all my flights booked or I wouldn't have all my hotels booked, but I'd kind of be like, oh, I'm going to be in this country. I eventually want to get to this country. It makes sense to get there, in this way. And then I'd look for those deals to fill in the holes. And as the deals popped up, that's how I would fill things in. So transitioning to how travel is now has been very interesting for me. And I don't know, I think just the biggest thing is like be flexible and expect for things to change. Like when I came on this trip, when I only flew to Greece a little over 2 weeks ago, actually 2 weeks ago today, I got here. And when my flight here got changed because of a change of one of the flights, I was going to miss my connection in London. So the day before my flight, American Airlines called me to tell me that I either had to fly one day earlier or one day later, but I couldn't fly one day earlier because it was that day and I would have had to be at the airport in like an hour. So I changed my flight to one day later, but that also meant that the COVID test I needed to transit London was no longer valid. So when I got to Denver, I had to find a new place to get a COVID test. And luckily I had I had ordered those Binax rapid proctored tests to my hotel there. So I would have some for the upcoming trips. And it's good that I had those because otherwise my only other option would have been to pay $250 at Denver airport for a rapid test. I didn't want to do that if I didn't have to. So I finally made it here. But when I came here, my plan was to go from here to Turkey and then to Sudan and then to Japan. But the flight from Cairo to Japan got canceled. And so that part of the trip isn't happening. And from there, I'm supposed to go to Argentina, but Argentina is still closed. So pretty much after, the end of October, I have no idea what's happening with my life because everything's too up in the air. And it's too hard to plan that far out because so many things could change.
Can you talk a little bit more about those rapid proctored tests, how you get them and how they work, where they work, if you know?
Yeah, so I ordered mine from emed.com. They sell only a 6-pack, I believe. There are other websites where you can get, you don't have to get 6, but I knew I was probably going to need all 6. So I just got 6. It was $165, including shipping, and they sent them overnight FedEx. So they arrived very quickly, and it's really easy. You just like open everything from the packet. You call into, go to this website and you hold up a QR code to the camera and it scans it. And then somebody comes and basically walks you through how to take the test. And then you set the test there for 15 minutes while it develops. And then the person comes back and it helps you interpret your test, which is pretty simple. It's like, is there 1 line or 2 lines? That's it. And then you get an email with the document that says, your test was negative. And I was a little bit unsure if that, like for London, for the UK, they have all these requirements about the sensitivity and the specificity, and that information wasn't readily available. So I didn't know if it was going to work or if my test was going to work. And I knew I had the backup plan of getting a rapid test in Denver, but it wasn't an issue at all. They never checked that. And I know these tests are developed to be good to fly back into the States, because even as a vaccinated person, even as a US citizen, a test is still required to go back into the US. So that's why I ultimately had these, was for eventually getting back.
So it's $165. Do you pay each time you have to make a new appointment? Like if you have to do 6 different things, or it's just $165 covers all of them?
$165 was for all 6 tests. And I think they're good for like 9 months or 8 months from the time they're ordered or the time they're manufactured. I don't know exactly, but they last for a pretty long time, and they don't all have to be taken by the same person either. When my mom comes here, she's going to have to fly back to the States. And instead of paying $50 for a PCR test at Athens, because Athens at the airport, you can get a test and it's, not $250. But it's still way cheaper to do these proctored tests over the internet. And then you don't have to worry about waiting in line or figuring out the right location, or, what if the results aren't ready in time or they're too busy to test everybody that day. It kind of takes all of those questions out of the equation.
So if you have a family of 6, you can just order the 6-pack for $160, do 6 appointments in a row, have all 6 of your family members tested. You're averaging like, $20-some a pop, rather than 50 at the airport, 250 at the airport. Right. So
yeah, and the only thing I guess I would say to keep in mind is that the website can only be logged in to one test at a time. So, you're the whole time of the test, like from the time I logged in until the time the test was complete, was probably about 25 minutes. So if you did have a family of 6, just be prepared to spend about 3 hours on the computer if you have only one computer, doing one person after the other.
That makes sense. But you could do 6 different logins, maybe.
I think you would need different devices. I mean, I guess, yeah, you would need different devices, because even if you had different like incognito windows, you still need the webcam. So.
Oh, because it can't cut away, or else you're like switching back and forth tests.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, the test has to be visible in the camera for the whole time it's developing, because the whole point of having it be proctored is to make sure that no one's screwing around with the results, pretty much.
Yeah, if you cut out, if the camera cuts out, what happens if your webcam just cuts out for a few seconds? Not good.
I don't know. I didn't experience that, but I would think if it's just a couple of seconds, it's probably fine. There's probably some built-in, set of rules that if it's, it's fine. But yeah, if you cut out for the whole 15 minutes the thing was developing, I feel like that would probably invalidate the test result.
Yeah. Yeah, something to note, make sure you have good Wi-Fi, good camera equipment while you're doing this. But that is a really good thing to know for anybody who's trying to travel internationally, is these eMed tests will save you a lot of money versus having to drive around, get tested at different places in town, having to get tested at the airport. This is a really good way to go.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of all of your different travels, what's the best points and miles redemption, or really any trip redemption, that you've ever gotten to do?
So this isn't exactly a redemption, but a few years ago, Emirates has their fifth freedom flight from JFK to Milan, and they were trying to promote this specific route. So they offered a promotional price for first class if you started in Canada and connected on WestJet to JFK and then to Milan. It was $3,000 round trip. Some of my friends and I figured out that we were able to force the routing to be through LA to Dubai and then to Milan. So we started out in Vancouver because it had to start in Canada. We flew WestJet down to LA, Emirates first class to Dubai, and then Emirates first class to Milan round trip. And it was still that same $3,000, which is not cheap, of course. But this flight earned 100,000 Alaska miles because it was in first class. So it earned like 350% of the miles flown. And I personally value my Alaska miles at about 2 cents each. So I looked at this as about a $2,000 rebate on my Emirates first class ticket, which made the net cost of the ticket only about $1,000 for peak summer travel to Italy. And we had our chauffeur service that took us from Milan to where we were staying. Since we had all booked the trip separately, we all had our own show. So we went to Lake Como, all 5 of us with our 5 chauffeurs, to a hostel. And we stayed at a hostel for a few days and then went to Lugano, Switzerland after. And then on the way back, we were able to have a stopover in Dubai for no extra cost. So I think we went to Dubai for 4 or 5 days. And yeah, so it's not a points and miles redemption, but it's still a travel hack. And that's like the best value I've ever gotten out of anything travel hacking related. And I probably ended up using those miles to book my Japan Airlines first class ticket later it was that year, I'm pretty sure.
How did you rig the route to go through Los Angeles rather than New York?
At the time, oh man, I can't remember for sure exactly how we did this. There are these 2 tools. One is called Book with Matrix, where if you go to ITA Matrix, which is just like a airline airfare search tool, you can't actually book through it, but it will give you prices for flights. And it's very powerful in that you can force routings. Like there are these extra codes that you can use to be like, route through JFK, or, only layovers that are longer than a certain length. Like you can tell it all of these things that most search engines won't let you customize. And then you can copy the search result page over into Book with Matrix. And Book with Matrix will try to get that same itinerary to price out with certain online travel agents. It doesn't always work, but sometimes you can force itineraries that aren't otherwise easy to find on an OTA. So I don't think that was the one we used in this case. There's another tool that I'm not as familiar with that I think is called Power Tools. It's like a Chrome plugin that you can use, or a Chrome extension that you can use to to help book these itineraries. I'm not as familiar with this one, but I think that's the one that we ended up using to book this specific itinerary.
So this is fascinating because I have not heard of these tools before. So you start with ITA Matrix, right? To rig the itinerary, but you can't book through there. So you copy and paste whatever comes out of that into Book with Matrix.
Right.
This is just itamatrix.com, bookwithmatrix.com.
ITA Matrix is matrix.itasoftware.com.
Okay.
And then Book with Matrix is just bookwithmatrix.com, I think.
Okay. And then Power Tools is just
Power Tools.
A Chrome plugin.
Is a Chrome extension. So if you just Google ITA Matrix Power Tools, then you can install the Chrome extension. And again, I don't even know for sure how well any of these things work anymore because I haven't booked any deals in so long because of the pandemic or any deals that required these tools in so long. So everything could be not even working anymore. No promises.
This is still fascinating though, because whenever we study the history of like manufactured spending techniques that don't work anymore. There's always certain concepts where there might be something else that does these things. So even just to know that there are ways to look up secret routes or to book secret routes or anything else, like just knowing those concepts are even possible really opens up the doors for creativity. So I definitely learned something today. I've never heard of these tools before.
ITA Matrix is definitely a good place to spend some time and play around. Google Flights has gotten a lot more powerful. So I think that's part of the reason why ITA Matrix kind of has fallen out of favor a bit, because like if you can get it to work on Google Flights, it's just so seamless. It's, and you can sort by, you can filter out different alliances or different airlines, and you can say, oh, like what's the cost with a checked bag or with only a carry-on, and it will like give you a lot of information, and then it's just so easy to book. But it didn't used to be that way. You used to have to either book direct or through the other online travel agents like Priceline and Orbitz, and they just aren't quite as user-friendly or powerful. But now we have Google Flights that's really quite powerful and very user-friendly. ITA Matrix is definitely not as user-friendly.
Oh yeah, this sounds like something where somebody's like pulling up a console on their like the terminal of their computer and being like, hack all of the things, all of the computer hacks, and like all of the parts of the computer that you shouldn't really be going into. That sounds like that, but for airline routes of
not
hey, little
quite
kid,
that crazy.
you shouldn't be playing in there, and you're like, what's in the sandbox? Let me dig around and try to redo the route. So I'm sure after listening to this episode, a ton of people are going to be checking to see what they can do and what kind of magic they can pull off with ITA Matrix.
Yeah, and there are all kinds of guides on the internet talking about what all of those different codes are to, force the routing onto specific airlines or through specific connecting points. There's that information is readily available on the internet.
We have learned about so many cool tools today, from ITA Matrix, the Power Tools thing, the eMed that can save you money when you're doing COVID tests, from all that you know about the world of travel hacks, points and miles, different tools that are useful. What's your number one piece of advice for people today that we can sum up for an Instagram quote card?
My number one piece of advice is to think about your goals and priorities and find the strategy that works the best for you. Lots of people will tell you never redeem your miles for economy or whatever. Just don't, it doesn't matter. If your points and miles are working for you, then they're working.
I like that. And I like how it brings it home too, because a lot of people who are probably listening to this are now so engrossed with the different tools and tactics that they can use where they're like, I'm just going to solve every problem in the world by using ITA Matrix because that's a new thing that I just learned about today. But tools and tactics are really just, it's just that. It's just tools. You can't use a hammer to fix every problem that you have in your house. If you have a leaky pipe, I highly don't suggest that you take a hammer to it. And it works that way with travel hacking a lot, where some people are like, I'm going to solve everything with the Chase Sapphire Preferred. You really can't. And so focusing on your end goals and focusing on your strategy, I think, is just a really important thing to reiterate every once in a while, to have that big picture kind of view, rather than saying, what's the secret website that we should go to? Because there's about 16 million secret websites, and all of them are probably good for one or two things. And it's a lot to memorize what they all are, and it's a waste of time to memorize what they all are if it has nothing to do with what you're actually trying to accomplish.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I'd just add to that, not to get caught up in what other people are doing, because travel, it's a very personal experience, and what works for somebody else won't necessarily work for you. I have a lot of flexibility in my life, so I'm able to take advantage of all of these fair deals, and I don't have to worry too much about whether or not award availability is going to exist, because I can just change my travel dates. But that's not necessarily true of everyone else.
Yeah,
not true of everyone else.
For sure. Great advice. And speaking of what other people are doing, can you give some recommendations for other people that our listeners should follow on the internet for awesome points and miles tips?
Two other people I recommend are Jeff Brownson. He's at Miles and Pints on Twitter and Instagram. He also has a podcast and talks a lot about travel and points and miles, but also beer. So if you're into beer, he's great to follow. And then Dia Adams, she's at the Dia Adams. Yes.
I personally really like to follow Jeff for the food content. The travel content's great, but I just feel like Jeff's food content speaks directly to me with the cheese curds and the Asian noodles, more so than even the beer. Like the miles content is great. The pint content about beer, okay, I'm like not that much of a beer person, but the food content, Jeff, excellent food content.
Yeah, he does have good food content too. I'm actually meeting up with him in a couple of weeks in Turkey. Hopefully, fingers crossed that all the plans stay in place, but that's the plan.
Awesome. And where can we find you on the internet?
On Instagram, I am at caroline.lupini, and on Twitter, I am at Caroline Lupini, no dot, and my website is carolinelupini.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Caroline, for coming on the show today. We learned so many cool next level tips, and I'm excited to start playing around with these tools myself.
Awesome. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Geobreeze Travel Podcast. If any of the cards mentioned in today's episode piqued your interest, please check out the links in the show notes for more information on any of the cards. Also, if you apply for a card using the links on that page, I may receive a commission too, so please and thank you. P.S. I hear the links work better in Internet Explorer or Safari, and sometimes the credit card applications tend to glitch out in Chrome. Additionally, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to this podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. And if you would like to make even more travel hacking friends, please sign up for the Patreon to access our monthly masterclass hangouts. We dive deep into a particular points program each month, and you'll get to ask all of your travel hacking questions and enjoy being around other people who enjoy points and miles just as much as you and I do. If you would like an invite to the next one, head over to geobreezetravel.com/hangouts to sign up to be on the invite list. Take care and happy travels!